The net was empty. 6 yards out, ball at my feet, 91st minute, and all I had to do was pass it into the goal. Instead, I rolled it sideways to a 19-year-old who had barely played a first-team minute all season. He scored, the stadium exploded, and 40 minutes later, in a silent dressing room, our manager asked me why I had just thrown away my own name for a boy nobody trusted. I told him. Nobody said a word after that. Some of them still haven't forgiven me. I'm not sure I need them to. My name is Daniel O'Say, and I captain Redbrook United, a club that has spent 11 years bouncing between the bottom of the second tier and the top of the third. We are not famous. We do not have billionaire owners or a training ground with a helipad. We have a stand named after a bus company and a chairman who sells insurance during the week. What we had that April afternoon was a home game against Ashcombe Rovers, with both relegation and promotion hanging on the result, and a boy named Femi Adeyemi, who had not been picked to start a match in 4 months. To understand why I gave that goal away, you have to go back 6 weeks to the Tuesday our kit got stolen. It sounds small. It wasn't. Someone went into the away dressing room after a cup match at Linford and took cash out of 3 separate bags, mine included, along with a watch belonging to our goalkeeper, Marcus Bell. £420 and a watch worth more than most of us earned in a week. The club investigated quietly, the way clubs do when they don't want the story getting out. Coaches went through the CCTV logs. There wasn't much footage. The corridor camera outside that dressing room had been down for repair since January, which the away side apparently knew and we didn't. Femi had arrived at Redbrook the way a lot of players like him arrive at clubs like ours, sideways, not upwards. He'd been let go by a championship academy at 16 for being, in their words, not quite physical enough, spent 2 years playing part-time football for a side called Marlow Wanderers while stacking shelves at a supermarket on weekday mornings.
He was, in other words, exactly the kind of player who has no institutional weight behind him when something goes wrong, no agent to call the club and ask pointed questions, no history of 5 years in the squad to make people stop and think twice before believing the worst. Just a quiet 19-year-old with a bus pass and a debut still ahead of him, which made him, whether anyone said this part out loud or not, the easiest person in the building to blame. Suspicion needs somewhere to land, and it landed on Femi. He was the newest face in the squad, 19 at the time, signed from a non-league side in the summer on trial, and kept on when our manager, Ray Colton, saw him run a fullback into the advertising boards twice in 1 half. He didn't have many allies in the dressing room yet. He was quiet. He kept to himself, and, this detail mattered more than it should have, he was the only player who had left the away dressing room and come back in during the 20 minutes the theft must have happened, because he'd forgotten his phone charger. Nobody accused him outright. That's not how it works in a football dressing room. What happens instead is smaller and colder. Conversations stop when you walk in. Nobody passes you the ball in the finishing drill unless they absolutely have to. Your peg gets moved to the end of the row, away from everyone else, and nobody quite remembers whose idea that was. Ray dropped Femi to the under-21s to let things settle, which everybody understood as a punishment dressed up as man management, whether Ray intended it that way or not. I want to be honest about my own part in this, because it isn't flattering. I didn't defend him. I told myself I was staying neutral, that it wasn't my place as captain to referee a dressing room dispute with no evidence either way. What I actually did was nothing, and nothing when a 19-year-old is being frozen out by 20 grown men is its own kind of verdict. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles over a football dressing room when a group of adults have decided, without ever voting on it, that someone doesn't belong. It isn't shouting, it isn't even unkindness most of the time. It's Femi sitting alone at the far end of the players' lounge with his headphones in, not because anyone told him to, but because nobody left a seat free near them anymore. It's him warming up on his own for sessions because the usual pairs had already formed without him. Once, in the canteen, I watched two of our midfielders pick up their trays and move to a different table when he sat down across from them, and neither of them.
Ray's decision to send him to the under-21s only confirmed in Femi's mind and everyone else's that the club itself had quietly sided with the suspicion. Nobody had proven anything. Nobody ever charged him with anything because there was nothing to charge him with. But belief doesn't wait for proof in a dressing room. And by the time 3 weeks had passed, most of the squad had simply stopped including him in the version of Redbrook United that existed in their heads. The first thing that should have told me something was wrong happened 3 weeks before the Ashcombe match on a Thursday. I was in the medical room getting strapping on my ankle when I heard our vice-captain, Ollie Vance, on the phone in the corridor outside. He didn't know I was there. "It's handled," he said. "Nobody's looking at it anymore. They're looking at the kid. Just relax." I didn't think much of it at the time. Ollie talked to agents and sponsors half the day. It could have meant anything. I filed it away without really filing it away at all. The second thing happened the following week at training. Our kid manager, a soft-spoken man named Trevor, who had been with the club longer than most of the stand had existed, was folding shirts near the laundry room when Femi walked past to get his boots. Trevor's hands stopped moving. He watched Femi all the way across the room, and when Femi was gone, he muttered something to himself I didn't catch and went back to folding like nothing had happened. I noticed it because it was strange, not because I understood it. I asked him if he was all right. He said he was tired. I let it go. The third thing was Ollie again, 10 days before Ashcombe. We'd just finished a shape session, and he was needling one of the younger lads about a missed pass, the way he sometimes did, half joking, half not. "Some people get away with everything round here," he said, glancing, just for a second, just long enough, toward the far end of the pitch where Femi was doing extra sprints with the fitness coach. Then he laughed and changed the subject. On its own, it meant nothing. Ollie said sharp things about half the squad on any given day, but 3 small things stacked one on top of another started to sit differently in my head than they had when they were separate.
10 days before the Ashcombe game, I was in the equipment store looking for a spare set of shin pads when I found Ollie's old phone in a drawer, the one he'd upgraded from at Christmas and never bothered to wipe or hand in. It wasn't locked. I wasn't trying to go through it. I was checking if it still had charge so I could give it back to him, and the Messages app opened on its own, mid-scroll from whatever he'd last been doing on it back in January. One thread, with a number saved only as M, stopped me cold. I'm not going to pretend I read it calmly. I sat down on an upturned crate and read the whole thing twice. It was a conversation between Ollie and Marcus Bell, our goalkeeper, the man whose watch had supposedly been stolen. Marcus had lost that watch himself at a casino 2 towns over the same week his contract renewal talks had stalled, and his agent had started asking pointed questions about his spending. Ollie's advice, spelled out across a dozen messages, was simple. Reported as stolen, blame the theft on the new kid, the one nobody in the dressing room liked yet, the one with no history at the club to vouch for him.
Insurance would cover part of it, sympathy would cover the rest, and Marcus's off-field problems would stay exactly that, off the record and off Ray Colton's radar during the exact weeks his renewal was being decided. Ollie hadn't taken a penny of it. That was almost the worst part. He'd helped a friend cover a gambling debt by letting a 19-year-old carry the weight of it because it cost him nothing and it was easy, and because some part of him had decided Femi didn't matter enough to protect. I didn't tell Ray straight away. I want to be honest about that too. My first instinct wasn't justice, it was rage, and rage makes you say things you can't take back to people who then spend the rest of the season deciding how much they hate you for it. I sat with it for 2 days. I talked to my wife about it in the vaguest terms I could manage, and she asked me one question that stuck. What does Femi actually need right now? An apology or his career back? The two aren't the same thing. An apology fixes what people believe about the past. It does nothing for a teenager who has spent 6 weeks being quietly told in 100 small ways that he doesn't belong in a first-team dressing room. Femi needed the second thing more than the first, and I decided the first could wait a little longer if it meant I got the timing of the second.
Ashcombe Rovers, at home, Redbrook Park, a Saturday in April, was the match that decided it for me. Ray brought Femi back into the squad for the first time in a month, more out of injury necessity than restored faith, and put him on the bench. We went 2-0 down inside 20 minutes, clawed it back to 2-2 by the hour mark, and with the game there to be won, Ray sent Femi on with 15 minutes left. He was electric. 2 defenders couldn't get near him. In the 90th minute, he won us a corner nobody else on the pitch would have chased down, and from the resulting scramble, the ball fell to me, 6 yards out, an empty net in front of me, and Femi arriving a stride behind, unmarked, screaming for it. I had the whole goal. I could have walked it in with my laces. Instead, I squared it across the 6-yard box and let him finish it. The place erupted. Femi ran to the corner flag and just stood there, both hands over his face, and I understood in that second that he wasn't crying about a football match. He was crying about 6 weeks of being made to feel like a thief in his own dressing room, and about the fact that the goal that just went in with his name on it meant something no header of mine ever could. Not everyone saw it that way. In the tunnel afterward, one of the local reporters asked me straight out why I'd passed up an open goal that would have made me the club's top scorer for the season. I said Femi deserved it more than I did. It sounded thin even as I said it, and I knew it. By Monday, the message boards had decided I'd thrown away a personal milestone out of some soft-headed sentimentality, and a couple of national tabloids picked up the Captain Snub's empty net angle without asking why. Ray Colton was not amused either. He pulled me into his office before training and told me, flatly, that decisions like that don't get made on instinct in the 91st minute of a game we needed to win. He wanted an explanation, and he wanted it that day, in front of the squad, because half the dressing room was asking him the same question, and he didn't have an answer for them. So that evening, after training, with the whole squad still in the changing room, I told them.
I didn't accuse Marcus in front of everyone, not at first. I asked Ollie to stay behind with Ray and me in the physio room once the others had gone, and I put his old phone on the table between us, still open on the message thread. I watched something go out of his face when he saw it. He didn't deny it. He tried for about 4 seconds, and then he stopped trying because there was nothing left to say that the screen hadn't already said for him. Ollie's excuse, when he finally found words for one, was smaller than I expected. "He's my mate," he said, meaning Marcus, not Femi. He was going to lose everything over a stupid bet. I didn't think it would go this far. I thought it'd just blow over. I asked him if he'd once, in 6 weeks, considered how far it had already gone for Femi. He didn't have an answer for that. Ray didn't raise his voice. He's not a shouter. He just asked Ollie to hand over the phone, told him training was cancelled for him until further notice, and asked me to bring Marcus in. Marcus walked into that physio room already knowing from the look on Ollie's face in the corridor that whatever this was, it was over. Ray brought Marcus in 10 minutes later. I'll spare most of the details of that conversation. It wasn't a pleasant one, and it isn't really mine to retell in full, but Marcus admitted everything inside 2 minutes of being shown the messages, the watch, the casino 2 towns over, the story about the theft, built to protect a contract renewal that was never actually threatened by his gambling until he made it about someone else's reputation instead of his own. At one point, he put his head in his hands and said, "I never thought it would land on him specifically. I just needed a version of the story where it wasn't my fault." I remember thinking that was almost the most honest sentence anyone said in that room all evening, and also the least forgivable. What happened after that mattered as much as the reveal itself, because this is where a story like this usually goes wrong. Either everyone forgives everyone by the weekend, which insults what actually happened, or somebody's career gets burned to the ground overnight, which almost never happens in real football, and shouldn't happen here either. Ollie was stripped of the vice-captaincy the following morning. The club's disciplinary panel fined him 2 weeks' wages, and he spent the rest of the season out of the matchday squad more often than in it, though nobody outside the building was ever told exactly why. He asked for a transfer in the summer, and Redbrook let him go on a free, which is its own kind of quiet consequence, a player nobody fights to keep. Marcus kept his place in goal because Ray decided, and I came to agree, that a gambling problem handled honestly deserved support rather than a public hanging, on the condition he spoke to the club's welfare officer every week and repaid what the insurance claim had cost the club out of his own contract. He's still our goalkeeper. We don't talk about that spring much, but we
And Femi didn't get a statue built for him either, whatever the version of this story that exists in some people's heads online might prefer. He got his place back in the squad on merit, not sympathy, and it took him another 2 months of hard training and one loan spell that nearly didn't happen before Ray trusted him in the starting 11 every week. What he did get that afternoon at Redbrook Park was the one thing 6 weeks of silent suspicion had taken from him without ever saying a word out loud. Proof in front of 4,000 people that somebody in that dressing room believed he belonged there. A week after the story broke properly, Ray gave a short statement to the local paper confirming an internal disciplinary matter had been resolved without naming anyone, which was as much as the club was ever going to say publicly. I found Femi in the car park after training, waiting for his lift from Trevor. I asked him if he'd known that night at Redbrook Park what I was doing when I squared the ball instead of shooting. He said no, not exactly, but that something in the way I looked at him before the corner came in told him to make the run anyway. He just thought, whatever happens, run, he said. I'd been telling myself that for 6 weeks by then. I didn't have a clean response to that. I just told him the club was better with him in it, and he nodded like he'd needed someone to say that plainly, out loud, for longer than he'd let on. The tabloids never printed a correction on the empty net snubs story, because there was never an official version of events for them to correct against. A couple of the beat reporters who cover Redbrook properly worked out the shape of it eventually, the way local reporters usually do, but nobody ran the full story while Marcus was still contracted to the club, and I've never regretted that restraint. Some things are true and still don't need to be a headline. I still get asked sometimes whether I regret giving away a goal that would have meant something for my own numbers that season. I don't. Numbers on a stat sheet are the same in April as they are in August. What isn't the same is a 19-year-old who spends the rest of his career believing, in the quiet moments before kickoff when the doubt creeps back in, that his captain once looked at an open net and decided his teammates' redemption mattered more than his own name on the scoresheet. We finished that season 8th, missing the playoffs by 4 points, and nobody remembers the table from